Hey there, this is Emily and Bernie from Third Place Works, where we help co-working professionals with tailored cohorts and one-on-one consulting. Our proven frameworks can help you get focused, stay accountable, and see real results. Want to learn more? Check out the show notes for all the details on how to join us and take your co-working business to the next level.
Hello, folks. It is the Co-working Values podcast, and we're about to get into something that made my head hurt so much. I just had to get the person responsible for it on to talk about it. So, Denise, what are you known for, and what would you like to be known for?
Well, I'm known for head hurting, I guess. I think that's a really good thing. If I was to say it in a nutshell, what I'd like to be known for is helping people think differently. Because one of my core feelings about this whole movement around the future of how we're going to work and live is that to work differently, we have to think differently. And that's where we have to start. Nothing else will change unless we start thinking differently. That's kind of what that report that we're going to talk about today is all about, is challenging the assumptions that we tend to live by and work by, re-examining them and rebuilding them. That's ultimately what I'd love to be known for.
It's working on. Maybe I'm just a very unresearched bit of person, but this we're going to put a link in the show notes to the Science of Flexibility report. But out of the many bits of paper flying around the internet about the future of work, this is something that has really made my head hurt and made me look up things. And even just in the citation notes, it is you can keep going on this forever. Can you just say how this came together with Sam and Ashley? Because a lot of people listening to this know those folks.
Yes, and I would be very much an outsider to a lot of folks that would be your typical listener. And just to kind of explain that, I met Ashley maybe 2 or 3 years ago, just through kind of future of work industry, which would be kind of the broader scope of how we work. And we hit it off personally. I think anyone that knows her loves her. You can't not love her. And really on it, where we really connected was I was coming from the enterprise world, the corporate world, and I'm looking around and I see all this massive body of knowledge workers that need to change the way that they work. And I'm looking over on my other shoulder and I see Ashley representing the co-working movement, which had its own very traditional origin and viewpoint. And I could see this huge gulf in between. Like, how do we help the enterprise world embrace co-working and flexible office space as a part of a healthy way of working for the future? And I really felt that we need to build that bridge. So Ashley had the very same viewpoint. So we're kind of looking at each other. We speak two very different languages, but we want the same thing. And very early on, we're like, let's do this. Let's work together in partnership with Sam and the guys at DeskPass to develop and research and write this. What we really wanted to be was this kind of hard punching, evergreen piece of knowledge and material that could be referred back to, that could be living, breathing thing that can help people collectively speak a common language to move us forward into the new ways of working by amplifying the co-working business, the flex workspace business for the everyday enterprise worker that doesn't even know it exists yet. And this kind of really bravely, we said, let's just do this. We know it's going to be hard. We know it's going to be tough, but that's kind of was how we started the whole process of the paper.
You make it sound so easy. This is something, folks, you're gonna want to download this from the show notes and stick it in Google Notebook, whatever it's called, and have set aside a couple of hours a day for a conversation with it, and it will be worth the effort. So I'm going to stop fanboying you folks and get into the questions. One of the things that really caught my attention here first was the third place thing, and that was because just before we came on, we were talking about the research group for collaborative spaces, and someone, I think it was like 2015 or 2016, we ran a symposium in London for the research group for collaborative spaces, and Adele was at Goldsmiths College, and she was a professor there. She's now in Paris, and she wrote a whole piece on third place. And I loved because I'm not going to try and explain it now, but I'm a third place person, and when this popped up in here, I loved it. And my question is, in that third place frame, how do co-working spaces, or whatever you want to identify them as, differentiate themselves from looking like an office or being an office? There's this tiny nuance there that is interesting.
So, even in my own, I'll give you one quick comment first, which is my framing for thinking on this is I have looked at and examined a ton of co-working places over the last couple of years as part of my own research, and I have walked into kind of a Regis type, and I know that I believe their model is more like look at office buildings that previously existed and repurpose them. And I walked into one and it just looked like a cubicle farm and it was marketed as co-working. And I just got shivers down my spine. I was like, this is not what I think envision for the future of kind of the best parts of what co-working can be. And then I started looking at more kind of independent spaces locally in the New York City, where I'm near. And I was like, oh, this feels right. This is what I think that the future of work can, one of the cornerstones can be. But to answer your question, which is how do you look at that nuance, I think I first have to explain what I've seen on the ground myself, meaning I'm coming from the enterprise world, and I mentioned huge volume of people I think need co-working and flex space. In my training, which means when I'm in the room with groups of enterprise workers, training them on how to understand how to work flexibly, I specifically introduced the concept of third spaces, mostly because I'm kind of like using a measuring stick to see what is the level of awareness for the average everyday knowledge worker that third spaces exist. And I kind of start by asking, we have traditionally thought of two workspaces. There's what happens in a HQ in an urban center, wherever that may be. And then there's the work that happens at home when you're in your home office or at your kitchen table staring at your screen. And I ask people, what about the space in between? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, what about all the other options you have? They're like, what do you mean? So what I'm trying to say is, even though co-working is a 20-odd year industry that's fully developed and profitable and fully fledging, there's so many people out there that need it that don't know it exists. And I know that because I've asked people a ton of time. And we actually then begin to teach a strategy called developing a work from near home strategy, which is looking at your portfolio of locations that you could potentially work from on any given day and assigning the work that you're doing on that day to the best location. So maybe it's a coffee shop because I'm filing emails, or maybe it's my local library because I'm doing deep work, or maybe it's a co-working space because I have a subscription to work for a certain number of days a week. And that is just so simple in its practicality, but it is so new for people to think that there's somewhere else they could work that's not an office space where they've been assigned a desk and not their home office. The first thing that often comes up is, oh, I couldn't do that. What about security, VPN, da 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 da? There's all these reasons why a lot of them I think are imaginary why they can't. But then they get really, once we really dig in deeper, they begin to pop up examples of times they actually have used third places but never had the words to use it. So going back to the paper, that's why this paper exists, to give people a common language and a communal framework to begin to understand where we speak the same language and understand the same things and concepts to begin actually doing the same thing at the same time, which I think is what progress is. So to go back to your point, like how do you differentiate independent kind of co-working places? My example of looking at a Regis cubicle farm versus independent co-working places, once I walk in to an independent co-working place, I mean, I instantly feel warm. I can feel the energy. I can feel the vibe, and I can slot right in to any co-working place. But I have that information though. I know what a third place is. I know the strategy I'm deploying. A lot of people don't. And I think that we have to bridge that knowledge gap and that awareness gap and the alignment of intrinsic motivations to why would I use that or use a co-working place consistently first before you can think about how you differentiate one place versus another.
So we're going to have to do more podcasts on this for sure, because I'm already got 10 more questions than the ones I came with. So folks, there's a lot in this report, which is why we're going to do a series of podcasts on it. And as we're discussing here, we know a lot of you are owner managers of independently owned co-working spaces who want to call, but there's a lot of stuff here that's really, like Denise said, she comes from enterprise, and this is one of the best things I've seen in my life, where it's this crossover of cuddly community conversation and that enterprise level thing. And now I'm going to get to my question, Denise, is there's a lot of education in the marketplace about what co-working is. And for the first time, when the pandemic happened, for the first time in, when was it, 2020, 2022? So like for the first time in about a decade or more of me being in co-working, people in my family said, oh, you do that co-working stuff. we've been asked to use that. And no one ever knows what I'm doing. It would be easier for me to be an undercover assassin than working co-working, because nobody knows what it is. And how can co-working spaces or co-working people, what can we do to educate people about the opportunity of what you call the third space?
Well, if I could just, the most effective way, honestly, Bernie, to be kind of abrupt about it, I think you first have to educate yourself. Because you can't.
That really hurt. That really hurts.
Sorry. I mean it in the nicest possible way. But what I mean is you have to equip yourself with this belief first before you can begin marketing this in a different way. And I actually have a separate question I want to ask you after this. Remind me. One piece of what I mean is, and this is part of kind of the methodology we developed, when people leave their home, traditionally speaking, and they walk out that front door, they get in their car to drive to work, or they get on a train or a bus or a bike, whatever it is. Then they get to the office, wherever they're going, they get coffee from the same person, they go up the lift, they close their office door. Those are a series of ritual and habitual habits and routines that really signify and signal to the human brain that I have left home and I've gone to work. And in the reverse fashion, when you come home, you've physically left work and you've signaling you've come home. And we tend to be two different people at home and at work. But when you are working from home for a repeatable or extended period of time, there's very often no physical boundary between home life and work life, signaling that you've gone to work or come home. And that can get very, 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 very blurry. And I think that's that lack of kind of boundary signaling to yourself and the others around you leads to poor distraction strategies, concentration strategies, noise strategies, and whatnot. And that's why I think that having a local access to a co-working place that you can go to and call your own on whatever pace and cadence you choose is extremely important. But I think that for co-working places that can begin speaking like that, or at least beginning to look at it in that lens, I think that's kind of how you begin to pull out, how do I intrinsically, or how do I align my marketing or marketing speak with the intrinsic motivation for a knowledge worker to leave their home office, to want to empower themselves, to set boundaries by coming to a co-working place and then amplifying and kind of getting those benefits of being there to make it kind of the ROI, if you will, on why I would go time-wise and resource-wise. So that's kind of what I mean by I think that the co-working movement or folks within it would do well to speak that speak. Does that make sense?
It does. As I was listening there was like a list of people popping through my head who opened a co-working space because they solved their own problem. Whether they ditched their corporate job, they didn't want to commute, they were a designer in university and wanted to be around other people. I'm certainly not saying the only people that can run a co-working space is this, but those people I'd walked in the moccasins or whatever the saying is of the people they're trying to attract. So there's this, there's less effort for them to talk about what they're doing because they've done it.
There's a saying like the pioneers take the arrows, the settlers get the land. And there is a lot to be said for being a pioneer in the space, but there's a lot to be said for having to normalize the use of something beyond your own comfort zone. And I actually struggle with the same thing because a lot of my thinking in my own business, which is why I struggle with it, is I start everything off with, can't you see? Like, can't you see all the value that a co-working as part of a blended workplace portfolio brings? Like, can't you see it? But the truth is, Bernie, most can't. Because even though like you and I and probably a lot of listeners have had the privilege of spending our time thinking differently, most people aren't because they're confined by their roles. The things that they do day to day, they may catch a podcast or read a blog but unless you're immersed in this world of change that's happening rapidly around us, it can be hard for people to be motivated to make the actual change. And the financial thing is something different, I think, but I'm just talking about the habit of using a co-working space and seeing the value of it as part of an individual's workplace portfolio and workplace strategy. I mean, individually, not necessarily only from the company. There is just a lot of knowledge that has to be shared and use cases beyond the folks that know how to do it because they individually were intrinsically motivated to make the change and start a co-working movement like the gentleman you're talking about.
What was your question? Because I'm on the edge of my seat now.
Okay, listen. This is one I kind of wanted to, and I think I'm beginning to solve it a little bit. What was that platform? Do you remember during the pandemic? What was that platform? You could drop
Clubhouse.
it. Clubhouse. That's the one. That's kind of where I started following co-working folks. There was a bunch of people that ran rooms on Clubhouse, and I would be the only enterprise person in there. And I felt like I was always asking the awkward questions, like, but don't you see all of these knowledge workers here that need to use flexible space to have a healthy kind of work-life balance? And I always felt like there was some kind of resistance to the enterprise opportunity. I think that's thawed over time, but am I wrong in thinking that? Can you help me think through that in terms of when you're talking about independent co-working as a network of businesses? Is there more of a welcoming to the enterprise crowd these days? Has that changed over time?
In the, I'm going to talk about this in, because I could read anything online and get a scope from that. But in the co-working spaces I have sat in on a regular basis since the pandemic, um, there's there's this knock-on effect of people had to find somewhere to work near home and all that kind of stuff. So here in Vigo, I sit in a room with people who work for enterprise bigger companies, and that's very normal for them. And some of those people would have done it anyway, and they were glad that they were given permission, in air quotes, by their company to finally do it. And some of those people just had to find a solution. And I remember right back, I don't know, maybe 2015 in co-working Europe, there was Patrick, who runs a co-working space in Ireland, and he'd got the HMRC, which is the tax office, had taken space in his co-working space, and we were doing this Q&A about attracting enterprise clients to your co-working space. And one lot of people, and this is not just in co-working, this is any business, everyone goes, oh, I want to work with a big company because they got lots of money. And it's a bit naive in my experience, because the amount of bureaucracy to work with a big company
That's right.
is like, I just don't work with big companies unless I know the person in there. So I've done work for big shiny companies, but that's because I knew Denise or I knew Bob, and I could shout at them, not the accounts department.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone was like jacked up because they saw the money. And then Patrick said, when these people come in, all these freelancers and creators and, independent economic agents come in, sit down and get on with it. When a company comes in, there is, they have to measure everything, do health and safety reports, time and motion,
Air
run
quality, I'm
tests,
sure.
air quality, everything like that. And
Yeah.
it's exhausting. And then there's just the snobbery of like, I'm a lone ranger, which I think is a bit, I've always thought was a bit naive. So part of it is how those people land in a co-working space. And part of it is them even knowing about it in the first place. One of my best examples, my favorite examples about this, is Indie Hall in Philadelphia, run by Adam and Alex. And when a bigger company would come to them, they would say, you can come and take 6 desks, but you all have to sit in different places. And I don't know, a lot of people would go, I'm not doing that. And they go, well, you can't come then. It's not the place for you. But we're going to spend, well,
I like
this
that.
is how we do it here. And
I
the
like
reason
that.
they made people, split up is because I'm going to say this for the listeners rather than you, Denise, but those 6 people from one company coming and sitting in that space together would get loads of energy and information and collaboration and magic meeting other people rather than sitting on their own. And there we go.
I want to give you one example that I've observed myself of that very same thing happening in the enterprise world, which was I was running a large scale training program at a very large company, and they were hot desking, which was new news. Now, the majority of people were really put off by the fact that they had not only the booking was a little inefficient and technically difficult to do, but the fact that they couldn't just habitually sit by the people they needed to was really frustrating to them. And they found that like a lower efficiency, if you will, on getting work done. But there was one guy that kind of stood up and he's like, well, actually, I kind of like that. I like the fact that I book my desk and I don't really know where it's going to be. And I kind of like the fact that I get to sit around all new people that I never would have met before. So it was interesting to me in that kind of sterile setting of a large corporate New York City kind of bank to see at least a spark, one spark of what you're saying, which is somebody natively knowing, wow, that is really cool. The fact that just by the nature of the way we are physically asked to sit, I had an opportunity to be around people I never would have been around before and meet new people and broaden the network. Now, the majority, of course, were like, wow, this is painful. I can't easily sit by my team. So I just thought that example always stood out to me as a hopeful piece. Like, how do we amplify and pull that thread to help people kind of see more about how variety can lead to better outcomes?
As someone, as an independent economic agent sitting in a co-working space with people from bigger companies and enterprise companies, it's just really interesting hearing how they work. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like having a tour of their workplace without having to have a tour of their workplace, and it's ridiculously beneficial. I want to ask you another question because we're sort of going a little bit longer, but I'm very happy to. Is another thing that like really stood out to me is the amount of attention paid to marginalized groups and how flexibility can reduce barriers and all that conversation. What are some of the kind of interesting, unexpected ways you've seen flexibility help marginalized groups in this whole, I'm going to say the future of work conversation, sorry.
Yeah. Well, the best way to explain that might be to give you an example of the opposite. This is kind of really, I find this really harmful on a go forward. There was a team I was working with, and we were running like a 2-day workshop on the team dynamics and flexibility and how to optimize them. And it was going really well. It was part of a larger program, and we'd had really good success, and it was amazing and so satisfying just for me individually to see people shifting and changing in the moment and having these aha moments, not by introducing anything wildly new, but just by helping them create space to look at the way they were working and examine the assumptions and say, "Ooh, oh, wow, we can do that and change that." Like just by reconfiguring what was already in front of them. But in this particular case, there was a decree made that uh, executives at a senior level and above were now being required to come back into an office, the office 5 days a week, thereby decimating the possibility of flexibility. And one of the senior executives was a female. She stood up literally abruptly in one of these sessions. She's like, this just kills the opportunity for women at work rising through the ranks. So I'm explaining it like this because sometimes it's easier to see the possibilities and flexibility by looking at an example of what happens when it's taken away. And as a female myself, working in the corporate world in the past and trying to rise the ranks, I could relate very closely to what she was saying. And she was right. This having the possibility of flexibility, which allows people to work in different locations at different times. In this particular case, what she was saying is it would have a huge predictive forward impact negatively on women at work. And my personal belief about flexibility is not that it gets women to work, it's that it gets working fathers home. And that's where the equality of it comes in. And that's kind of what she was amplifying. So I could see the pain on her face as she was looking at her own peer group about how more flexibility was taken away, what that really meant on a practical level for folks that want to have kind of career advancement. So that's kind of an interesting way to answer your question about what happens when you don't have flexibility in the real world. And the opposite would be, of course, all the potential that it brings. So, I mean, the potential flexibility, that's a whole nother podcast, I think.
It is
Dissecting
definitely.
that is, and at the end of the day,
I'm holding back on questions.
Yes. Yeah.
What is just to like spend a few minutes wrapping up
Mm-hmm.
and to set up whatever the next stage of our podcast is. There's because this isn't like flexi work 2025, is it? It's a much broader conversation, and this report is a springboard for a lot of stuff. And there's that mainstream regurgitated LinkedIn conversation that even the people in it are sick of it.
That's right.
And, there's a lot of people I follow on LinkedIn who I don't believe I just accidentally answered another back to the office flexible workspace question. What is wrong with me? I should have a coffee before I turn on the internet. And there's something you said to me just as we started, which was like, we're losing our edge on this conversation.
Yeah.
Could you, I know that's a very vague jumping off point, but could you go for that, please?
Yeah. I just think that opportunity is often about timing. And in my own case with Sway, an idea is only as strong as the market that needs it. So the opportunity for advancing flexible options is only as strong as the market that needs it. And if I was to look back, I mean, I look at everything with a degree of patience and know that real growth takes meaningful time and work and iteration and practice. So the evolution of flexibility at work is really still only in its infancy, and it happened very spontaneous with the advance of the pandemic, which shoved us all into this remote first way of working. But we're at this kind of point in time, political influences and whatnot aside, that there is this kind of large scale shift back towards more traditional ways of working, and that is a whole nother podcast for another time. I kind of my own views on that, and I'm sure you have strong views too. But everything is about timing and what is smart. And I think a lot that the not that the window is closing, I think the window that's closing should be sealed shut. And I think that we need to get the folks that are not looking at this seriously out of the way. That gives us a clearer view on those companies and leadership teams that are serious about flexibility, not as a perk to an employee, but are examining it as an intelligent model of work for the future. How do we design it? How do we train for it? How do we procure the services and solutions that support that, which I believe coworking is one cornerstone? And how do we amplify that in a way that drives more productivity in our workforce? So even though I feel one door is closing, I'm like, don't let it hit you on the way out. That's how I feel. Because
Yeah,
those that are left are the ones that are going to seriously take action, invest, and move forward.
there's I see so many things around, like adverts in flexible office windows and stuff like this, and it says like, let's reimagine the work is changing, and let's reimagine the future of work and all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's just because I spend too much time reading this stuff. It's already happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's like happened 5 years ago. It happened before the pandemic. There's a friend of mine, Alberto, in Spain. He was, it was like March 2020, and everyone's like, trying to work out what the pandemic means. And he said this thing, which I've just regurgitated so many times, but it was so cutting at the time. He said, already the pandemic has accelerated the future of work by 10 years. So you better pay attention.
Yeah.
And, it's like, when I heard it, I was like, oh, of course. But I wouldn't have had the wit to have said that or bravery to say that at that moment in time. But he just everyone stopped talking for a minute when he said it.
Yeah, that reminds me of another part of my research on all this was actually futurism and futurist techniques. But one of interesting saying is like the future is already here. It's just unequally distributed. And what I mean is there are already innovations happening in the way that we work. I mean, there's many that we could touch on here, whether it's the not only decentralization like we're referring to here, but location and time. It's also addressing skills and skills gap. It's looking at the impact of AI at work. It's looking at the multi-generational shift. There are many moving parts right now, but it is being completely redesigned from the ground up. And Bernie, the future is already here. It is just unequally distributed. What I mean is there are already pockets of innovation and people already doing this, probably very well. We're not hearing or seeing because not yet mainstream, but at some point, systems thinking kind of tells you that most change happens on the fringe of the conversation, but there's usually an event like November 22 with AI and ChatGPT that takes this, what was previously in a pocket innovation, and drops it into the mainstream. So there are already people very successfully working on these innovations and deploying them, likely in smaller pockets and smaller scale. But it is the big companies like the JP Morgans and the AT&Ts of the world that get the airwaves and get the media attention, that's the door I want to close, because I want to look and focus on the rest. Even if it's a smaller by number, if there are people who are meaningfully committed to change, great. Let's roll up our sleeves and help them move this forward. And then by role modeling these new practices, that's, I believe, how it goes from the fringe and drops into the mainstream.
That's delicious. I'm going to do a cliffhanger here. So, Denise, where can people connect with you online, engage with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably where I read a lot, and that's the easiest way to reach out to me would be on LinkedIn. Either follow or DM me if you have a question. I know you're going to link the report to your show notes here. And that's it. I think we just take it from there.
Yep. So links to the report and Denise's LinkedIn in the show notes. And this is one of a few podcasts we're going to do on this, because there's lots of really, really interesting stuff in here for people who run co-working spaces and for people who are interested in, the future of how we work and hang out together in general. I can't believe I said in general there. Sorry. I never know what I'm going to say at the end of this podcast until this moment comes. But anyway, thank you for your time and attention today. I'm sure I said that already. And go to the show notes, which we're so proud of. There's the LinkedIn co-working group, and you can click through there, and we'll put something about this conversation there, which is a great place to carry on there. There's lots of you from all around the world, so we can get lots of different perspectives on there. There's the European Co-working Day, which is the 14th of May, 2025. Register your interest now and get involved with that. That's a great way to be bringing people together. There's also a link to Ashley Proctor's co-working idea project, which is about inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, and also a link to follow the Co-working Values podcast on LinkedIn. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Be careful out there. It is a jungle.